Good contest from Dort. Haliburton falls down. He looks hurt. Tatum in so much pain.
I think he did something to his Achilles.
Ooh, I hope not. So we had 7 this year. We had 0 last year under the exact same circumstances. We are looking at it, and in fact, we had already convened a panel of experts.
Jayson Tatum, Damian Lillard, Tyrese Haliburton. It was impossible to miss the flurry of Achilles injuries happening not just to guys in the NBA, but to some of the biggest stars in the leagues. From 1990 to 2023, 45 NBA players tore their Achilles. And this season alone, 7 players tore their Achilles. Clearly, something is going on here. Tearing your Achilles was almost a sign of becoming old. Like with Kobe Bryant, when he tore his, it was a sign that he was no longer going to be one of the most dominant players in the NBA. But something different is happening here. Younger guys are tearing their Achilles now. And these catastrophic incidents aren't just accidents. They're a link in a massive chain of events that have been changing basketball and sports over the course of the last 15 years. In this video, I talked to an NBA trainer about why these injuries start way before an NBA career even begins, and why the shortening a season, new shoes, or load management are just band-aid patches on an issue that's been growing for years. So how did we get here? In order to understand that, we have to take a step back and look at what the NBA used to be. Let's take a look at what basketball was like 20 years ago on the court versus what it looks like today. The game was so much slower, and it feels like you're watching YouTube on 0.75 speed. And the statistics back this up. In the 2010s, basketball games averaged about 95 possessions per 48 minutes. Now the average number of possessions is up to 99, a 5% increase since 2010. And we've seen this massive shift happen because of the way that basketball has changed. Since the Steph Curry three-point revolution, since the Warriors became this massive dynasty, basketball has completely transformed. There's way more cutting and movement and Euro steps now. And while the game used to be more physical in the 1990s in the sense of guys elbowing each other and boxing each other out of the paint, the game now is much more internally physically intensive. The influx of all of these injuries have led to the popularity of something called load management, which has become a controversial term across the NBA. Load management is when players take games off planned over the course of a season in order to try to manage their health situation. This started in popularity with superstar Kawhi Leonard, who, with the Toronto Raptors, began to manage his degenerative knee situation that has hampered him throughout the course of his entire basketball career. Kawhi doesn't ever play a full season because he always wants to make sure that he's ramping up as the team heads into the playoffs, that he's healthy when the team needs him the most. And this has spread across the league in popularity. The prime example of this has been Joel Embiid of the Philadelphia 76ers. Embiid came out of Kansas as a 19-year-old dealing with a ton of injuries to his legs and missed a lot of time during his early years in the NBA. But over the course of Embiid's career, there's been more and more backlash towards him. Fans have complained that because Embiid is never playing, they worry that he's never actually making as big an impact on the team as he could be. And a lot of fans, given that Embiid has continued to get injured despite all of the load management, have wondered, does load management even work? I talked to Arnold Lee, who was a trainer for the Chicago Bulls up until last season and now works with high schoolers in the suburbs of Chicago.
Unless you're dealing with like a chronic situation, like for example, like Kawhi, chronic degenerative knees. And I understand that, but I think for the majority of players, it's, I think practices have gotten a lot less intense. So really the intensity of a game, you're only going to get it in a game. It's hard to replicate that during practice. I don't want to sound like the old guy, but old school NBA, they practiced hard. They practiced just as hard as games were. And I think that kind of builds kind of resilience for the body to go through a whole 82 game season and the playoffs.
But the game isn't just faster now. There's more of an emphasis of trying to show off on social media how you're training in the off season. A few years ago, I did a story for ESPN where I dove into how high school basketball across the country was changing because of Instagram. People were starting to play basketball differently because Instagram gave them the incentive to chase highlights. As a result of chasing highlights, they would gain followers and potentially have an opportunity to get NIL money or get a scholarship to college. That same dynamic has translated over to training in the NBA, as guys have tried to put up videos over the course of an offseason to show off and gain followers, and sometimes training for Instagram doesn't necessarily lead to the best results.
With any good thing, there's always going to be bad, right? And I think social media is kind of an example of that. Like, you have a lot of good content out there, but there's a lot of garbage. Unfortunately, if you don't have the right people around you, you're not going to find the right people for what you're looking for, especially for professional athlete.
And that Instagram mindset is starting at an even younger age now. Even more foundationally, the youth basketball system is driving these kids into injury after injury. So many young athletes now are specializing in a single sport at a young age. And before they even enter the NBA, these young basketball players might have played 1,000 games before they even touched an NBA basketball. And this is such a massive shift from where things used to be, where athletes used to play multiple sports instead of specializing in one. But when basketball players are just focusing on basketball, you're almost double, tripling the number of opportunities to have injuries and the amount of stress that you're putting on tendons. And this is happening not just in basketball, but across all sports. In the NFL, there were 22 Achilles ruptures in the 2023 season. That is a massive increase from 1980 through 2001, when there was an average of 4 Achilles tears per season, according to the National Institute of Health. Someone like Christian McCaffrey is constantly maintaining his Achilles injuries in order to maintain his level of greatness. In baseball, Tommy John surgeries are hitting an all-time high, with 230 in 2023 across all levels, including 70 in Major League Baseball alone, the most since tracking began. We're seeing younger players get the surgery more frequently before they even make their pro debuts, and nearly 1 in 4 MLB pitchers have had Tommy John surgery now. At the same time, the average velocity has ticked up from 90 miles per hour to 94.1 miles per hour, and kids are throwing 90 miles per hour before age 14 with no tissue foundation. In order to learn more about that, make sure to read my old colleague Jeff Passan's book, The Arm. It is a great look into the phenomenon around Tommy John surgery. And even across Europe, soccer players are breaking down like NBA guards too, with hamstring injuries, calf injuries, and Achilles tendon injuries. There's too many games and not enough recovery. Everything that's happening with these tearing Achilles tendons actually illustrates this bigger thing that's happening in sports. The professionalization of sports is happening at a younger and younger age before the bodies of these young kids even develop. And at the same time, we're putting so much pressure on these young kids to chase their dreams to play college basketball or professional sports that they're playing more and more games.
They're getting sold on this idea that they need to specialize in one sport because, coaches are seeing them, hit well as an 8 or 9 year old and throw really well as an 8 or 9 year old, and trying to sell these parents like, hey, I can make your kid better at 8 or 9. It doesn't really mean anything until they hit puberty, really. And, as a parent, like, who's going to say no? Every parent wants to give their children the world and give them the best opportunity. But I really think that they're getting sold on this idea that their kid is going to be, a professional athlete at way too early of an age. And they're just pushing their kids down a very tough path physically.
And because the system hasn't been around long enough, we're only now starting to see the effects of what this does to athletes. It's insane that Jayson Tatum and Tyrese Haliburton are in the primes of their career, and they're rehabbing an Achilles injury that typically in the past wouldn't happen to guys until they were much older. And I think this speaks to this even bigger thing beyond just the number of games that athletes are playing now. The explosive output and movements of athletes today are quickly outpacing the limitations of the human body in sports science.
The game is faster. The guys are bigger, faster, stronger. I think the question is, are their bodies ready to go at that intensity, at that game level?
I think it's an absolute miracle that someone like LeBron James has been able to stay as healthy as he has for as long as he has. He invests a ton of money into maintaining his body. And the thing that really shocked me when I saw LeBron in person for the first time is that you see him on TV and he obviously looks like this enormous guy. And he is. He's 6'9". At the same time, you wouldn't expect his frame to look like the way that it does. Basketball players are obviously really tall, but I think that one of the things that TV distorts about basketball players is the way that their frames look, because so much of them are actually built similarly, where their shoulders are enormous, but they're incredibly lean. They look like almost cross-country runners, and their hips are kind of thin like a ballerina dancer. It's something that is really hard to explain unless you see it up close. It looks nothing like the average human body. But because guys are able to put on so much more muscle now while maintaining this lean frame in the way that LeBron has over the course of his entire career, I'm not sure that the rest of our tendons and our body parts are ready for all of that. I love the modern NBA and how fast modern basketball has gone, but I do think that there is a larger systemic issue here. A holistic approach that's not being taken to protect young athletes from injuries. I think because our culture has gotten so hyperfixated on squeezing as much as possible, as quickly as possible out of these athletes, guys are hitting a wall a lot younger than they used to in the past. And ultimately, I'm not really sure how much any of these leagues across all the sports care so much about this, because if a guy gets injured, even if a superstar gets injured, there's another guy ready to replace them, waiting in the wings. I think one of the things I worry about with all of this is that there's been so much conversation around whether or not the NBA has been good at developing the stars of the next generation. And having young guys like Tyrese Haliburton and Jayson Tatum go down with these massive injuries at young ages in the middle of their prime as they're in positions to win championships puts a massive stopgap in the abilities for fans to develop relationships and attachments and loyalty and love for these basketball players. But I'm curious to hear what you guys think about this. This is such a fascinating situation, and it was such a bummer that after an incredible NBA Finals, that in Game 7, Tyrese Haliburton tore his Achilles and put a damper on an incredible NBA Finals. And if you feel like you've learned something, make sure to subscribe to my channel to get some more videos making sense of sports. And I'll see you in the next one.